The triumphant smirk on Eloise Bailey's face made my blood boil as she slid the revised contract across her marble desk with manicured nails. "We're restructuring your compensation package," she said, her voice dripping with entitled satisfaction. "Effective immediately, your salary drops from $95,000 to $19,000 annually." $19,000. For someone who had single-handedly built their luxury hotel chain's award-winning guest experience program that generated over $50 million in annual revenue, the CEO's 26-year-old daughter, fresh out of business school, with zero real-world experience, had been handed my department to prove herself, and apparently, destroying my livelihood was her idea of leadership. What she didn't know was that Daddy had no idea what his precious princess was really doing to the employees who built his empire. She thought she had me trapped, desperate, and powerless. She thought wrong. Because when you corner someone who has nothing left to lose, and when that someone has documentation that could expose everything, well, that's when the real games begin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandelier above Eloise Bailey's corner office cast prismatic light across her pristine white desk as she adjusted her designer blazer and fixed me with a look that could freeze. Champagne. 26 years old, blonde highlights perfectly arranged, sitting in a chair worth more than most people's monthly rent. The nameplate in front of her read, Eloise Bailey, Vice President of Guest Experience Operations, a title that had been mine in everything but name for the past 4 years. "Margot, please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her with the casual authority of someone who had never worried about a single bill in her entire privileged life. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was the one who had designed this very office space, who had selected every piece of furniture, every accent piece, every detail that screamed luxury hospitality excellence. Now I was sitting in my own creation, being judged by someone who wouldn't know guest satisfaction from guest services if it came with a Harvard Business School case study. I lowered myself into the Italian leather chair, my worn blazer, the nicest one I owned, suddenly feeling shabby against the opulent surroundings. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, I could see the sprawling Phoenix skyline, the desert mountains in the distance, and 3 of the 5 luxury resort properties I had personally transformed from struggling mid-tier hotels into award-winning destinations that were booked solid year-round. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called this meeting," Eloise continued, her voice carrying that particular tone of fake concern that only came from people who had never experienced real hardship. She reached into her top drawer and withdrew a manila folder, placing it deliberately in the center of her desk like she was dealing cards in a high-stakes poker game. My stomach was already churning. In the 3 months since Arthur Watson, CEO and Eloise's father, had announced his daughter would be taking over operational oversight of guest experience initiatives, I'd watched her systematically dismantle programs I'd spent years building. Guest satisfaction scores that had consistently ranked us in the top 1% of luxury hotels nationwide were starting to slip. Employee turnover in departments under her purview had increased by 300%. Revenue from our signature experiences, the wine tastings, spa packages, and cultural excursions that I'd developed partnerships for, was down 40%, but I'd kept my mouth shut, kept my head down, kept doing the work that needed to be done. Because I needed this job. Because my 15-year-old daughter Sophia was a sophomore at Phoenix Preparatory Academy, a private school where she finally felt like she belonged after years of struggling with social anxiety at public schools. Because the $1,200 monthly tuition, combined with her therapy sessions and the small apartment we shared in Scottsdale, stretched my $95,000 salary to its absolute limit every month. Eloise knew all of this, of course. She'd made it her business to know every employee's personal circumstances the moment Daddy handed her the keys to the kingdom. Information was power, and power was something Eloise Bailey wielded like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, calculated, and designed to cut deep. "The hospitality industry is evolving rapidly," she began, opening the folder and scanning its contents with theatrical precision. "Guest expectations are higher than ever, competition is fierce, and we need to ensure our operational costs align with current market realities." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever corporate speak was being used to justify something terrible. "Of course," I managed, keeping my voice steady. "What did you have in mind?" Her smile was the kind that appeared in nightmares, perfectly white teeth, dead eyes, and the unmistakable satisfaction of a predator who knew her prey was cornered. "We're restructuring compensation across several key positions to better reflect current industry standards and educational qualifications." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. The letterhead read, "Watson Hospitality Group, Compensation Adjustment Notice." My eyes went straight to the numbers, and for a moment, I thought I was having some kind of vision problem. There had to be a mistake. A typo. Something, current annual salary, $95,000 adjusted annual salary, $19,000 effective date, Monday, September 11 th $19,000. They wanted to pay me $19,000 a year to continue doing a job that generated millions in revenue for their properties. I understand this may come as a surprise, Eloise continued, her voice maintaining that infuriating tone of false sympathy. But we've conducted a comprehensive analysis of similar positions across the industry, and frankly, your compensation has been significantly above market rate for someone with your educational background. My educational background. There it was. The real reason behind this calculated humiliation. I had started working in hospitality at 18, straight out of high school, because college wasn't an option when you were supporting yourself and sending money to help your younger siblings. I'd worked my way up from housekeeping to front desk to guest services to operations, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I'd earned certifications in hospitality management, completed online courses in business administration, and consistently exceeded every performance metric placed in front of me, but I didn't have an MBA from Stanford like Eloise. I didn't have a trust fund or family connections or the luxury of treating entry-level positions like temporary entertainment before ascending to executive roles. The good news, she continued, clearly enjoying every second of this, is that we're committed to retaining talent, so we're offering you the opportunity to stay with the Watson family. Think of it as an investment in your continued professional development. Professional development. They were cutting my salary by 80% and calling it professional development. I understand you have personal obligations that make you particularly motivated to maintain steady employment, Eloise added, and there was no mistaking the threat buried in those carefully chosen words. She knew about Sophia's school. She knew about the therapy. She knew exactly how trapped I was. When do you need an answer? I asked, proud that my voice didn't shake despite the earthquake happening in my chest. End of business Friday, she replied, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied air of someone who had just executed a flawless checkmate. I know it's a big decision, but I'm confident you'll make the right choice for your future here at Watson Hospitality. I stared at the paper in front of me, the numbers swimming slightly as my brain tried to process the mathematical impossibility of surviving on $19,000 a year in Phoenix, Arizona, in 2024. Rent alone for our one-bedroom apartment was $1,400 a month. Sophia's school tuition was another $1,200. That was $31,200 annually just for housing and education, and they wanted to pay me $19,000 total, but I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't give Eloise Bailey the satisfaction of seeing me break down. In her designer office, instead, I folded the paper carefully, placed it in my purse, and stood up with as much dignity as I could muster. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, meeting her eyes directly. I'll definitely give this the consideration it deserves. Something flickered across her face then, maybe disappointment that I wasn't providing the dramatic reaction she'd been hoping for, maybe surprised that I was maintaining my composure. But it was gone quickly, replaced by that same smug satisfaction. Wonderful, she said, already turning her attention back to her computer screen. I look forward to hearing from you soon. I walked out of that office with my spine straight and my head high, but inside, I was already calculating. Calculating how many months of savings I had left. Calculating whether I could find another job quickly enough. Calculating how I was going to explain to Sophia that we might have to make some very difficult changes. What I wasn't calculating was how Eloise Bailey had just made the biggest mistake of her privileged life. Because while she saw a desperate single mother with limited options, what she was actually looking at was someone who had spent 4 years documenting every single thing she'd built for Watson Hospitality Group. Someone who had records, contacts, and a level of institutional knowledge that couldn't be replaced by an MBA and daddy's money. Someone who was about to remind her that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who have absolutely nothing left to lose. Let me tell you who I really am. Because Eloise Bailey's version of my story, the one that justified paying me poverty wages, was about as accurate as a Phoenix weather forecast in monsoon season. My name is Margot Davies, and I'm 38 years old. I've been working in the hospitality industry for 20 years, since I was 18 and desperate to make something of myself after aging out of the foster care system. No family trust fund, no safety net, no backup plan, just determination and an absolute refusal to let circumstances define my future. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I started at Watson Hospitality Group 4 years ago, I wasn't looking for just another job. I was looking for a career where I could use everything I'd learned from 2 decades of working in hotels, resorts, and restaurants across Arizona. From scrubbing toilets at a Motel 6 in Tucson to managing guest relations at a boutique resort in Sedona, I'd seen every aspect of hospitality from every possible angle, but more than that, I was looking for stability. For the first time in my life, I had someone depending on me who mattered more than my next paycheck. Sophia is my 15-year-old daughter, and she's the reason I get up every morning with purpose. I adopted her when she was 8. She'd been bouncing between foster homes for 3 years after her biological parents lost custody due to substance abuse issues. When I met her, she was this tiny, withdrawn little person who flinched every time an adult spoke too loudly and had never lived anywhere long enough to call it home. We understood each other immediately. Sophia has what her therapists call selective mutism with social anxiety disorder. In simple terms, she can talk, she has a brilliant, funny, incredibly insightful voice when she feels safe, but in new situations or around unfamiliar people, words just disappear. It's not shyness or stubbornness. It's a neurological response to stress that can make traditional school environments absolutely devastating for young people like her. After 2 years of watching her struggle in overcrowded public school classrooms where teachers didn't have time to understand her needs, I made the decision to enroll her at Phoenix Preparatory Academy. It's a small private school that specializes in supporting students with learning differences and social challenges. The classes have 8 students maximum. The teachers are trained in alternative communication methods. They have a full-time counselor on staff who actually understands trauma responses. For the first time since I'd known her, Sophia started thriving. She joined the school's environmental science club. She made 2 close friends. She began speaking up in class, asking questions, even giving presentations when topics interested her. Her grades went from C's and D's to A's and B's. The transformation was miraculous, and it cost $1,200 a month. Add in her weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Stanley Green, a psychologist who specialized in adoption trauma and anxiety disorders. And we were looking at another $400 monthly. Our health insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. So when Watson Hospitality Group offered me a position as Senior Guest Experience Coordinator at $95,000 annually, it felt like winning the lottery. For the first time since becoming Sophia's mom, I could afford to give her everything she needed without choosing between her education and her mental health care. I threw myself into that job like my life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. Watson Hospitality Group owned 5 luxury properties in the Southwest, 3 resort hotels in Phoenix, 1 in Tucson, and a boutique hotel in Flagstaff. When I started, they were struggling with guest satisfaction scores that hovered around the 70th percentile, employee turnover rates that were hemorrhaging money, and revenue streams that weren't keeping pace with their overhead costs. Arthur Watson, the CEO and founder, was a decent man who'd built his company through a combination of smart real estate investments and genuine passion for hospitality. But he was approaching 70, thinking about succession planning, and increasingly disconnected from the day-to-day operations that made his properties successful. That's where I came in. Within my first 6 months, I'd completely overhauled their guest feedback systems, implemented new staff training programs that reduced turnover by 60%, and developed partnerships with local businesses that created unique experience packages for guests. Wine tastings with boutique vineyards in the Sonoran Desert, guided hiking excursions led by certified naturalists, cultural tours that showcased authentic Southwestern art and cuisine instead of tourist trap nonsense. By the end of my first year, guest satisfaction scores had jumped to the 95th percentile across all properties. Revenue from experience packages alone was generating an additional $3.2 million annually. Industry publications were writing articles about Watson Hospitality's innovative approach to luxury guest experiences. Arthur Watson pulled me aside at that year's company holiday party and told me I was the best hire he'd made in 20 years. I should have realized then that making yourself indispensable to a family business can be dangerous when the family includes people who feel entitled to success they haven't earned. By year 2, I was essentially running all guest experience operations across the 5 properties, though my title remained Senior Coordinator. I didn't mind. The work was challenging and fulfilling, the pay allowed me to provide for Sophia without constant financial stress, and I was building something I could be proud of. I developed relationships with guest services teams at each property, learning their strengths and addressing their challenges. I created systems for tracking guest preferences and communication between properties so that returning visitors felt recognized and valued. I negotiated contracts with vendors and partners that improved both quality and profitability. Most importantly, I documented everything. Every process I developed, every partnership I negotiated, every training program I implemented. Not because I was paranoid, but because I was professional. Good systems require good documentation, and I wanted to ensure that the programs I built Could continue to succeed even if I wasn't there to manage every detail personally. That documentation would turn out to be more valuable than I could have imagined. By year 3, Sophia was flourishing at Phoenix Prep. She'd been elected to the Student Environmental Council and was working on a project to implement composting programs at local businesses. Her selective mutism had improved dramatically. She still struggled in large groups or high-stress situations, but she could advocate for herself, participate in classroom discussions, and even give presentations to her classmates. Dr. Green told me during one of our quarterly check-ins that Sophia's progress was remarkable, and that the consistency and stability in her life had been crucial to her development. I was finally building the kind of life I dreamed about when I was her age and bouncing between foster homes. Stable income, meaningful work, a home where both of us felt safe and valued. That's when Arthur Watson announced that his daughter Eloise would be joining the company as Vice President of Guest Experience Operations. I should have seen the writing on the wall immediately. I should have started updating my resume the day that announcement was made. But I believed, naively, it turns out, that good work speaks for itself, that results matter more than relationships, and that a family business would recognize and protect the people who had contributed to its success. I was about to learn just how wrong a person can be about the fundamental fairness of the world, but I was also about to discover exactly how much fight a mother has in her when someone threatens her ability to provide for her family. Eloise Bailey had no idea who she was really dealing with before I dive deeper into this story, and trust me, it gets so much more intense from here. I need to pause for a moment and connect with all of you watching this. Because what happened to me at Watson Hospitality Group isn't just my story. It's a story that's playing out in workplaces across the country, in industries from tech to retail to healthcare, and I have a feeling that many of you have lived through some version of what I'm about to share. First, I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment and let me know what city, state, or country you're in. I started sharing these stories because I wanted to understand how widespread workplace exploitation really is, and every time I see comments from viewers in different places, it reminds me that these problems aren't isolated incidents. They're systemic issues that affect working people everywhere. Are you someone who's ever had a new boss come in and immediately devalue your contributions? Have you experienced that sinking feeling when you realize that years of excellent work can be dismissed by someone who sees you as a threat to their authority rather than an asset to the organization? If you're nodding your head right now, you're not alone, and I want you to know that your experiences are valid and important. I've been making videos about workplace injustice and corporate manipulation for about 8 months now, and the response has been overwhelming. Not just in terms of views, though I'm grateful for every single person who takes time to watch, but in terms of the stories you share in the comments. Single parents who've been passed over for promotions because managers assume they're less committed due to family responsibilities. Employees who've built entire departments or systems, only to watch new leadership take credit for their innovations. People who've been told they're lucky to have a job when they ask for fair compensation. If this resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the numbers, though YouTube's algorithm certainly appreciates it, but because I want to build a community of people who refuse to accept that workplace exploitation is just the way things are. Every subscriber represents someone who believes that workers deserve respect, fair compensation, and basic human dignity. That matters more than you might realize, and if you're someone in management or leadership watching this, I hope you're paying attention too. Because this isn't about demonizing people in authority positions, it's about recognizing that power comes with responsibility, and that responsibility includes treating the people who make your success possible with the respect they've earned. Now, I want to address something specific that I know some of you are thinking, because I get these comments on every video. Why didn't you just quit immediately? Why didn't you see this coming? Why didn't you have a backup plan? These are fair questions, and they come from a place that I understand. When you're watching someone else's story unfold, it's easy to see the red flags and wonder why the person didn't just walk away. But here's the reality that I think many of you will recognize. When you're a single parent, when you have someone depending on you, when you've finally found stability after years of struggle, walking away from a steady paycheck isn't just difficult. It can feel impossible. I want to be honest about the mental calculation that happens when you're in this position. You tell yourself that maybe it's temporary. Maybe if you just keep your head down and continue doing excellent work, things will improve. Maybe the new boss just needs time to understand your value. Maybe you can weather this storm without disrupting your family's life. And there's something else that I think is important to acknowledge. When you've grown up without financial security, when you've experienced real poverty, there's a voice in your head that whispers, at least you have a job. At least you're not homeless. At least you can keep the lights on. That voice makes it incredibly difficult to advocate for yourself, even when you know you're being treated unfairly. How many of you have stayed in situations that you knew weren't right because the alternative felt too risky? How many of you have accepted less than you deserved because you were afraid that speaking up would mean losing everything? I see those comments every time I post a video, and I want you to know that I understand that paralysis, but here's what I've learned through this experience. And what I hope my story demonstrates: sometimes the thing you're most afraid of, confronting the injustice, demanding better, risking the known for the unknown, is actually the path to the life you've been trying to build all along. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the parents watching this. Whether you're single parents like I am, or you're part of a two-parent household, I know that decisions about work and career become infinitely more complicated when you have small humans depending on you. The guilt about taking time away from your family to build your career, the stress of trying to provide financial stability while also being emotionally present, the constant worry about whether you're making the right choices for their future. It's overwhelming. If you're working in a toxic environment because you need the paycheck to support your family, I see you. If you're questioning whether it's worth it to fight for better treatment when it might put your income at risk, I understand that internal struggle. And if you're wondering whether your family situation makes you an easy target for exploitation, unfortunately, you're probably right, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. One more thing before we continue: if you find value in these stories, if they help you feel less alone in your own workplace struggles, or if they give you insights that might help you navigate similar situations, please consider hitting that like button. It helps other people find these videos, and it helps me understand what content is most useful to this community. I read every single comment on my videos. Every story you share, every question you ask, every word of encouragement or advice you offer to other viewers, it all matters. This isn't just me talking to a camera. It's a conversation with people who understand that work shouldn't have to be a daily battle for basic respect and dignity. And if you're someone who's currently dealing with a situation similar to what I went through at Watson Hospitality Group, stick around for the rest of this story. Because what happened next changed everything, not just for me, but for several other employees who were being treated just as unfairly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept that abuse is normal. Sometimes standing up for yourself creates ripple effects that benefit people you've never even met. And sometimes the people who seem to hold all the power are actually much more vulnerable than they appear. Eloise Bailey was about to learn that lesson the hard way, but first, I need to tell you about what I discovered when I went home that night and really started thinking about everything I'd built for Watson Hospitality Group over the past 4 years. Because what I found in my files was going to change everything. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's talk about what happens when the person you underestimate turns out to have been preparing for this moment all along. Let me paint you a clear picture of exactly what I'd built for Watson Hospitality Group over 4 years. Because understanding the scope of my contributions is crucial to understanding just how calculated and devastating Eloise's attack really was. When I walked into Arthur Watson's corporate offices in downtown Phoenix in September 2020, the hospitality industry was in complete chaos. COVID had decimated travel, hotels were operating at 20% capacity when they were operating at all, and everyone was scrambling to figure out how to survive, let alone thrive. Watson Hospitality Group was bleeding money like a severed artery. There 5 properties: the Desert Palms Resort and Spa, Canyon Vista Hotel, Southwestern Suites, Flagstaff Mountain Lodge, and the Tucson Business Center, were each struggling with their own unique challenges. But they all shared the same fundamental problem: they were operating like 5 separate businesses instead of one cohesive hospitality group. There was no standardization of guest services across properties, no shared database of guest preferences or booking history, no coordinated marketing efforts, no unified training programs. Each location was essentially winging it, and it showed in every metric that mattered. Guest satisfaction scores ranged from a dismal 62% at the Tucson location to a mediocre 74% at Desert Palms. Employee turnover was averaging 180% annually across all properties, meaning they were completely replacing their entire workforce almost twice a year. Revenue per available room was 40% below industry standards for comparable luxury properties, but the thing that bothered me most wasn't the numbers, though those were certainly concerning. It was the fact that guests weren't having experiences that justified the premium pricing these properties commanded. You could stay at Desert Palms Resort and Spa for $400 a night and receive worse service than you'd get at a $120 Hampton Inn, simply because there were no systems in place to ensure consistency, quality, or attention to detail. I'd spent 20 years in hospitality, and I could see the potential in these properties immediately. The bones were good: beautiful locations, well-designed spaces, adequate staffing levels. What was missing was leadership that understood how luxury hospitality actually works at an operational level. So I started building. My first project was developing a comprehensive guest profile system that could track preferences, special occasions, and service notes across all 5 properties. This wasn't just a simple database, it was an integrated platform that allowed front desk staff in Phoenix to see that a guest celebrating their anniversary had requested extra towels during their last stay in Tucson, or that a business traveler always asked for a room away from the elevator. The system took me 3 months to design and implement, working with our IT contractor Matthews Anderson Tech Solutions and training staff at each location. But the results were immediate and dramatic. Within 6 months, return guest bookings increased by 35% across all properties. Guest satisfaction scores for repeat visitors jumped to 91%. Next, I tackled the employee training nightmare. Each property had been handling training independently, which meant new hires at Desert Palms were learning completely different protocols than new hires at Canyon Vista. The inconsistency was confusing for employees and frustrating for guests who expected similar service standards across the Watson brand. I developed a comprehensive training program that covered everything from basic hospitality principles to property-specific procedures. But more than that, I created a mentorship system where experienced staff at high-performing locations would spend time training teams at struggling properties. This wasn't just about standardizing procedures, it was about building a culture where excellence was the expectation, not the exception. The program required me to spend weeks at each property, working directly with staff to understand their challenges and customize training materials for their specific guest demographics and operational constraints. I created training videos, developed assessment protocols, and established ongoing education requirements that ensured staff skills continued to develop over time. The impact was transformative. Employee turnover dropped from 180% annually to 45% within 18 months. More importantly, guest satisfaction scores became consistently high across all properties. We were regularly hitting 94 to 96% satisfaction ratings, putting us in the top 5% of luxury hotels nationwide. But I didn't stop there. I realized that Watson Hospitality Group was missing enormous revenue opportunities by not offering curated experiences that showcased the unique character of each location. Guests were coming to Arizona for more than just a hotel room. They wanted authentic experiences that connected them to the culture, landscape, and communities they were visiting. So I spent months developing partnerships with local businesses, artists, and service providers to create experience packages that guests couldn't get anywhere else. At Desert Palms, I partnered with Sonoran Sunrise Vineyards to offer exclusive wine tastings in our desert garden, complete with education about indigenous plant varieties and sustainable farming practices. At Canyon Vista, I worked with Red Rock Adventures to provide guided hiking experiences led by certified naturalists who could teach guests about local geology and wildlife. The Flagstaff Mountain Lodge became a hub for cultural experiences. I partnered with local Navajo artists to offer jewelry making workshops, and with Northern Arizona University's anthropology department to provide lectures about regional history and archaeology. The Tucson Business Center developed a reputation for unique corporate retreat packages that combined professional development with authentic Southwestern experiences. Each partnership required months of negotiation, quality control, and ongoing management. I had to ensure that every vendor met our standards for professionalism, safety, and guest satisfaction. I developed detailed contracts, established insurance requirements, and created feedback systems that allowed us to continuously improve the quality of experiences we offered. The financial results were extraordinary. Revenue from experience packages grew from zero in 2020 to $4.2 million annually by 2024. But more than that, these offerings differentiated us from competitors and justified our premium pricing. Guests weren't just paying for a hotel room, they were paying for access to experiences they couldn't get anywhere else. Industry recognition followed quickly. Travel Plus Leisure featured Watson Hospitality Group in their Best Authentic Southwest Experiences article in 2022. Arizona Business Magazine named us Hospitality Innovation Company of the Year in 2023. The Arizona Hotel and Lodging Association gave us their Excellence in Guest Services Award 2 years running, but perhaps most importantly, I built relationships with every department at every property. I knew the name of every department head, understood the operational challenges each location faced, and had created communication systems that allowed for rapid problem-solving and information sharing. I wasn't just managing guest experiences. I was functioning as the operational backbone that allowed 5 separate properties to operate as one cohesive, highly successful hospitality group. By 2024, Watson Hospitality Group was generating $47 million in annual revenue, with profit margins that exceeded industry averages by 23%. Guest satisfaction scores consistently ranked us among the top luxury hotel groups in the Southwest. Employee satisfaction surveys showed that 89% of our staff felt proud to work for Watson Hospitality and would recommend the company to friends seeking employment. I had documentation for all of this. Detailed project reports, financial analysis, guest feedback summaries, employee surveys, industry recognition, partnership agreements, training materials, and operational procedures. For years of meticulous record-keeping that showed exactly how I'd transformed a struggling hotel group into an industry leader, what I didn't have was an MBA from Stanford. I didn't have family connections in the hospitality industry. I didn't have a trust fund or social media following or any of the credentials that Eloise Bailey seemed to think mattered more than actual results, but I had something she didn't have and couldn't buy. I had earned my expertise through 2 decades of hands-on experience, and I had proven my value through measurable, undeniable results. The question now was whether any of that would matter when going up against someone who had been handed power. Simply because of whose family she belonged to. I was about to find out. The drive home from Watson Hospitality Group's corporate offices usually took 23 minutes, but that afternoon it felt like hours. I sat in Phoenix traffic on Camelback Road, staring at the mountains in the distance, trying to process what had just happened in Eloise Bailey's pristine office. $19,000. The number kept echoing in my head like a broken record. I'd done the math 3 times during the drive, hoping I'd somehow misread the paperwork, but the calculation was always the same. After rent and Sophia's tuition, I'd have negative $12,200 annually. That wasn't poverty, that was financial impossibility. My hands were shaking as I pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex. Desert Willows was a modest community in Scottsdale, nothing fancy but clean and safe, with a pool that Sophia loved and neighbors who knew our names. For the first time since moving in 3 years ago, I found myself wondering how much longer we'd be able to call it home. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to compose myself before going upstairs. Sophia was incredibly perceptive. One of the side effects of growing up in unstable situations is that you become hyper-aware of adult stress and anxiety. The last thing I wanted was for her to pick up on my panic before I'd figured out how to handle this situation, but when I opened the apartment door, she was sitting at our small dining table with homework spread everywhere, and she looked up with that bright smile that never failed to make my heart sing. "Hey, Mom. How was your day?" "It was interesting," I managed, setting my purse down and trying to keep my voice light. "How was school?" "Really good. We started our water conservation project in environmental science, and Mrs. Foster said my research on xerophytic plants was exceptionally thorough." She beamed with pride, and I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of love and terror. This was what I was fighting for. Not just a paycheck, but Sophia's ability to attend a school where teachers knew her name, understood her needs, and celebrated her unique interests. Where she felt confident enough to speak up in class and pursue projects that excited her. "That's amazing, sweetheart. Tell me more about the project." She launched into an enthusiastic explanation of desert plant adaptations and water retention strategies, her eyes lighting up as she described her plans for interviewing local botanists and creating a presentation for the school's Earth Day celebration. This was the Sophia I dreamed of when I first met her 7 years ago, confident, curious, engaged with the world around her. Halfway through her explanation, she paused and tilted her head, studying my face with that disconcerting intensity that made her such a good student. "Mom, are you okay? You look different." I tried to smile. "Just tired. It was a long day." But Sophia had spent too many years reading adult emotions for survival to be fooled by my weak attempt at normalcy. "Is it work stuff? The kind of work stuff that makes you do math at the kitchen table until really late?" My heart sank. She remembered those nights when I'd struggled to make our budget work, when unexpected expenses had thrown off my careful financial planning. She'd been watching, worrying, taking on emotional burdens that no 15-year-old should have to carry. I sat down across from her and took a deep breath. "There might be some changes at work. But whatever happens, we're going to figure it out together, okay?" Her expression grew serious. "Changes like when you had to work extra shifts at the Sedona resort? Or changes like when we had to move apartments because the rent went up?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens with my job, your school and your therapy aren't going anywhere. Those are non-negotiable." She nodded slowly, processing this information. Then she asked the question that broke my heart and changed everything. "Mom, do you think people at your work don't understand how smart you are?" I blinked, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Well, you always talk about the cool stuff you create for the hotels, and you're always solving problems that other people can't figure out. But sometimes when you come home from work, you seem smaller. Like someone told you that the things you're good at don't matter." Smaller. She'd captured exactly what I hadn't been able to articulate about my interactions with Eloise. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial attack was devastating enough. It was about being systematically diminished, having my expertise dismissed, being treated like my years of experience and proven results were irrelevant because I didn't have the right pedigree. Sometimes adults make decisions based on things that don't really matter, I said carefully. Like what schools someone went to, or who their family is, instead of looking at what they've actually accomplished. Sophia nodded knowingly. Like how some kids at my old school thought I was stupid because I didn't talk much, even though I was reading at a higher level than most of them. Exactly like that. She was quiet for a moment, then looked at me with an expression that was far too mature for her 15 years. You know what Dr. Green says about people who try to make you feel small? What's that? He says they usually do it because they're scared you're actually bigger than they are. And that the best way to handle bullies isn't to make yourself smaller, it's to remind them how big you actually are. I stared at my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had survived foster care and anxiety disorders and social challenges, who had learned to advocate for herself in situations where adults had failed to protect her. When had she become so wise? You're right, I said quietly. You're absolutely right. For the first time since walking out of Eloise's office, I felt something other than panic and despair. I felt anger. Clean, focused, productive anger. Eloise Bailey thought she could exploit my financial vulnerability and maternal responsibilities to force me into accepting poverty wages. She thought my lack of an expensive education made me powerless. She thought that having Arthur Watson's last name gave her the right to destroy the career I'd built through 20 years of hard work and measurable results. She was wrong. That evening, after Sophia had finished her homework and gone to bed, I spread every file I had related to my work at Watson Hospitality Group across our dining table. For years of documentation, project reports, financial analyses, guest satisfaction surveys, employee feedback, industry recognition, partnership agreements, training materials, and operational procedures. I'd been keeping these records because I was thorough and professional, not because I'd anticipated needing them as evidence. But as I reviewed everything I'd built and achieved, I realized I had something that Eloise didn't have and couldn't take away from me, proof of my value, and more than that, I had proof that Watson Hospitality Group's success over the past 4 years was directly attributable to my work. Without my guest experience systems, my staff training programs, my partnership development, and my operational improvements, they would still be struggling with 70% satisfaction ratings and hemorrhaging money. I started making lists. What I'd created, what I'd documented, what I could prove, what I legally owned versus what belonged to the company, and for the first time since that morning, I smiled, because while Eloise Bailey had Arthur Watson's last name and a Stanford MBA, I had something much more powerful. I had evidence that I was indispensable to their business success, and I was starting to suspect that she'd just made a mistake that was going to cost her everything. My daughter was right. It was time to remind everyone exactly how big I actually was. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was panicking. The panic had transformed into something much more useful, methodical determination. I spent hours at my dining table, organizing 4 years of documentation into categories, cross-referencing dates and outcomes, and building a comprehensive picture of exactly what I'd contributed to Watson Hospitality Group's transformation. By 3 a.m., I had 3 distinct piles of paperwork spread across every surface in my living room. The first pile contained everything I'd created that was clearly company property: training manuals that used Watson branding, internal memos, employee schedules, and operational procedures that were specific to their properties. The second pile was more interesting: documentation of partnerships I'd developed, relationships I'd built, and systems I'd designed that existed independent of Watson Hospitality's infrastructure. These weren't just company assets, they were professional relationships and intellectual property that I'd cultivated through my own expertise and industry connections. But it was the third pile that made my heart race with possibility. These were documents I'd created on my own time, using my own resources, before implementing them at Watson Properties. Detailed market research I'd conducted from my home computer. Partnership proposals I'd drafted during weekends. Training methodologies I'd developed based on 20 years of personal experience in hospitality management. Most importantly, this pile contained something I'd forgotten about until I started digging through my files: comprehensive documentation of a guest experience management system I'd been developing as a potential freelance consulting tool. Let me explain why this mattered. 2 years ago, during one of Sophia's therapy sessions, I'd been sitting in Dr. Green's waiting room with my laptop, working on a project proposal for improving guest services at Canyon Vista Hotel. But instead of using Watson's systems to document my ideas, I'd opened a personal file I'd been tinkering with for months: a comprehensive framework for luxury hospitality management that could be adapted for any property or hotel group. what started as a way to pass time during Sophia's appointments had evolved into something much more sophisticated. I'd been building a complete methodology for guest experience optimization, drawing on everything I'd learned from 20 years in the industry. The system included assessment protocols, implementation strategies, staff training frameworks, and measurement tools that could transform any hospitality business. I'd never mentioned this project to anyone at Watson Hospitality Group. It was my own intellectual property, developed entirely on my own time, using my own equipment and resources. But as I reviewed my notes from the past 2 years, I realized something that made my pulse quicken. Many of the innovations I'd implemented at Watson Properties had been based on concepts I'd originally developed for this independent project: the guest preference tracking system that had increased return bookings by 35%. I'd prototyped the core framework at home before adapting it for Watson's needs. The staff training program that had reduced employee turnover by 140%. The foundational methodology was something I'd been developing as a potential consulting service. The partnership development strategy that had generated $4.2 million in additional revenue. The approach was based on principles I'd documented in my personal files months before implementing them professionally. I wasn't just an employee who had built valuable systems for Watson Hospitality Group. I was an independent consultant who had been licensing my expertise to them for 4 years, even though neither of us had recognized it in those terms. At 4 a.m., I called in sick to work, the first sick day I'd taken in over 2 years, and started making phone calls. My first call was to Rosalind Foster, a hospitality industry attorney who specialized in intellectual property and employment law. I'd met her at an Arizona Hotel and Lodging Association conference the previous year, and we'd stayed in touch through LinkedIn. She'd built her practice specifically around protecting hospitality professionals from exploitation by larger companies. "Margot, I'm so glad you called," she said when I reached her later that morning. "I've been watching Watson Hospitality Group's growth over the past few years, and I've wondered about the team behind their transformation. When can you come in? I think we need to have a very detailed conversation about your situation." My second call was to Robert White, the former general manager of Desert Palms Resort who had left Watson Hospitality 6 months earlier to start his own boutique hotel consulting firm. Robert had witnessed my work firsthand and had offered several times to provide references if I ever decided to explore other opportunities. 24 hours to respond to an 80% pay cut, he said when I explained the situation. "That's not restructuring, Margot. That's constructive dismissal. They're trying to force you out while avoiding the legal complications of firing you outright." But it was my third call that really opened my eyes to the scope of what was happening at Watson Hospitality Group. I reached out to Lydia Perry, who had been the assistant director of guest services at Canyon Vista until she'd been restructured out of her position 3 weeks earlier. Lydia had 22 years of experience in hospitality management and had been instrumental in implementing many of my training programs across the properties. "Margot, I'm so relieved you called," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I wasn't sure if I should reach out to you, but what's happening over there is insane. They didn't just cut my position, they've been systematically pushing out anyone with substantial experience or institutional knowledge." She told me about 6 other employees who had been forced out in the past 2 months. All of them were experienced professionals. All of them had been given impossible ultimatums or restructured into positions that were clearly designed to make them quit. All of them had been replaced by recent college graduates who were willing to work for significantly lower salaries. "It's not just about cutting costs," Lydia explained. "It's about removing anyone who might question Eloise's authority or who has the experience to recognize that her innovative management ideas are actually destroying everything you built over the past 4 years." This was bigger than just my situation. Eloise wasn't just targeting me, she was systematically dismantling the entire experienced workforce that had made Watson Hospitality Group successful, replacing institutional knowledge with cheap, inexperienced labor that wouldn't challenge her authority. But she'd made a critical error in targeting me first. Because unlike the other employees she'd forced out, I had documentation that proved my value wasn't just substantial, it was irreplaceable. That afternoon, I met with Rosalind Foster in her downtown Phoenix office. She reviewed my employment contract, my documentation of intellectual property development, and my records of contributions to Watson Hospitality Group's success. "This is extraordinary," she said after 2 hours of review. "You've essentially been operating as an independent consultant while being classified as an employee. The intellectual property implications alone are fascinating, but there's something else we need to discuss." She pulled out a copy of Arizona employment law regarding constructive dismissal. "What they're doing is illegal," she explained. You can't cut someone's salary by 80% and call it restructuring, especially when you're clearly targeting them for reasons unrelated to job performance. But more importantly, based on what you've shown me about your intellectual property development, I think we can make a case that Watson Hospitality Group has been using your proprietary systems without proper compensation. She outlined a strategy that made my hands shake with possibility. Not just fighting the pay cut, but potentially claiming ownership of the systems and methodologies I developed, and seeking compensation for the millions in revenue they generated. Using my intellectual property. How long do we have to build this case? I asked. You have until Friday to respond to their offer, she said. But I think we can be ready much sooner than that. The question is, how far are you prepared to take this? I thought about Sophia, about Phoenix Preparatory Academy, about the life we'd built together. I thought about Lydia and the other employees who'd been forced out. I thought about the guest satisfaction scores that were already starting to decline under Eloise's management. As far as it takes, I said. That evening, I began preparing for war. Not the dramatic, emotional kind of confrontation that Eloise probably expected from a desperate single mother, but the methodical, documented, legally bulletproof kind of war that someone with 20 years of professional experience and 4 years of meticulous record-keeping could wage. Eloise Bailey had no idea what she'd just unleashed, but she was about to find out. The next 3 days were a masterclass in strategic warfare disguised as business as usual. While Eloise Bailey believed she had cornered a desperate single mother with no options, I was systematically building a case that would fundamentally change the power dynamic between us. Wednesday morning, I walked into Watson Hospitality Group's corporate offices at exactly 8:30 a.m., just like I had every day for 4 years. I smiled at the security guard, made small talk with the receptionist, and settled into my desk in the guest experience department as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. My first stop was a meeting with each of the department heads. At our 5 properties, conversations I'd been planning to have anyway as part of my regular operational check-ins. But this time, I had a different agenda. At Desert Palms Resort, I met with Kimberly Miller, the guest services manager who'd been instrumental in implementing my customer preference tracking system. We reviewed the quarterly satisfaction reports over coffee in her office, discussing trends and areas for improvement. But I also asked her something I'd never asked before. Kim, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to implement a similar guest experience system at a different hotel group, what would be the biggest challenges? She looked puzzled but thoughtful. Well, the system itself isn't that complicated. It's really about the underlying philosophy and training. You'd need someone who understood both the technical aspects and the hospitality psychology behind it. Why do you ask? Just thinking about industry trends, I said casually. How much of what we've built here do you think depends on Watson's specific infrastructure versus the general methodology? Honestly, I think the methodology is what makes it work. The software is just software. But the way you've structured the data collection, the staff training protocols, the follow-up systems, that's all based on your approach to guest relations. I'd estimate that maybe 20% is company-specific, and 80% could be adapted to any property. I made careful notes of our conversation, documenting not just her technical assessment but her attribution of the system's success to my specific expertise rather than Watson's infrastructure. I had similar conversations at each property throughout Wednesday and Thursday. Not interrogations, just natural discussions about operational systems with managers who'd worked closely with me for years. What I discovered was both validating and strategically valuable. Every single department head attributed Watson Hospitality Group's transformation to my specific contributions, not to company resources or Arthur Watson's leadership. More importantly, several of them volunteered information that I hadn't expected. You know, Margot, said Joshua Williams, the operations manager at Canyon Vista Hotel, I've been getting calls from headhunters lately. The word is out in the industry about what we've accomplished here, and other hotel groups are trying to poach our management team. They specifically ask about the person who developed our guest experience systems. This was news to me. I'd been so focused on my day-to-day responsibilities that I hadn't realized my work was attracting attention from outside Watson Hospitality Group. What kind of calls? I asked. Luxury hotel chains, boutique resort groups, even some of the major hospitality consulting firms. They want to know if the person who developed our systems might be interested in bringing that expertise to their organizations. I always tell them they'd have to go through official channels, but, he shrugged. The interest is definitely there. By Thursday afternoon, I had gathered intelligence that completely reframed my understanding of my professional value. I wasn't just a talented employee at a regional hotel group, I was apparently a recognized innovator whose work was being studied and coveted by major players in the hospitality industry. That evening, I called Rosalind Foster with an update on my research. "This is even better than I hoped," she said after I summarized my conversations. "You've essentially documented that your intellectual property has value independent of Watson Hospitality Group. But there's something else we need to discuss." She'd been conducting her own research into my situation, and what she discovered was both encouraging and infuriating. "I've been looking into Eloise Bailey's background and her tenure at Watson Hospitality," she explained. "Did you know she's been systematically targeting employees for restructuring, based on a consulting report that recommends replacing experienced staff with recent graduates to optimize labor costs?" I felt my stomach tighten. "What kind of consulting report?" "It's a standard cost-cutting strategy that's been making the rounds in family businesses. The idea is that you can maintain operational effectiveness while dramatically reducing payroll by replacing senior employees with entry-level workers. The problem is that it only works if you can transfer institutional knowledge quickly and completely. Which is impossible in hospitality," I said, understanding immediately. "Exactly. And here's the interesting part, the consulting firm that wrote this report has a track record of leaving businesses worse off than they started. They optimize for short-term cost savings while ignoring long-term operational sustainability." This explained everything. Eloise wasn't targeting me because she questioned my abilities or because my position was actually redundant. She was following a playbook that treated experienced employees as expensive liabilities rather than valuable assets, but she'd made a crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that my knowledge and systems could be easily transferred to cheaper replacements. Thursday evening, I received a call that changed everything. "Ms. Davies? This is Philip Cook from Southwestern Luxury Resorts. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I got your number from Robert White, who spoke very highly of your work at Watson Hospitality Group." Southwestern Luxury Resorts was one of the most prestigious hotel groups in the region, with properties in Scottsdale, Sedona, and Park City. They were known for their innovative guest experiences and industry-leading customer satisfaction ratings. "We've been following Watson Hospitality's transformation over the past few years," Philip continued, "and we understand you've been instrumental in developing their guest experience systems. We're expanding our operations and looking for someone to lead our guest experience innovation across all properties. Would you be interested in discussing an opportunity?" My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. "I'd be open to learning more." "Excellent. We're prepared to offer a compensation package starting at $145,000 annually, plus performance bonuses tied to guest satisfaction improvements across our portfolio. The position would include a research and development budget for innovation projects, and we'd be very interested in adapting some of the methodologies you've developed to our specific properties." $145,000. Plus bonuses. Plus a research budget. Not only was this a complete rescue from Eloise's financial attack, it was a 50% increase over my current Watson salary. "When would you like to meet?" I asked. "How about tomorrow afternoon? I know your situation at Watson is complicated. We're prepared to move quickly if you're the right fit for our organization." Friday morning, the day of my deadline to respond to Eloise's insulting offer, I walked into Watson Hospitality Group's offices for what I hoped would be the last time as their employee. But I wasn't walking in defeated. I was walking in with a strategic plan that would either result in Eloise backing down completely or my transition to a much better position with a company that actually valued expertise. I'd spent the week building evidence of my value, documenting the independence of my intellectual property, and securing an alternative that was better than anything Watson Hospitality Group had ever offered me. But I'd also done something else. I'd quietly reached out to 3 other employees who had been targeted for restructuring, and connected them with both Rosalind Foster and potential opportunities at other companies. If Eloise wanted to dismantle the experienced workforce, she was going to discover that we weren't going quietly into unemployment. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in Southwestern Luxury Resorts Scottsdale offices, signing an offer letter that guaranteed I'd never have to worry about affording Sophia's education or therapy again. By 11 a.m., I was back at Watson Hospitality Group, walking toward Eloise Bailey's office with a folder that contained her worst nightmare, proof that she'd just made the most expensive mistake of her professional life. The war was about to begin. And I was going to win. I spent Friday morning getting ready for battle with the same methodical precision I'd used to build Watson Hospitality Group's guest experience systems. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blue blazer that Sophia had helped me pick out for job interviews, paired with my lucky pearl earrings, the ones my foster mother had given me when I aged out of the system. Professional, confident, unshakable. I reviewed my notes one final time, organizing documents in order of impact. First, the Southwestern Luxury Resorts offer letter that proved my market value. Second, Rosalind Foster's legal analysis of my intellectual property claims. Third, the documentation showing systematic targeting of experienced employees. And finally, the piece de resistance, my comprehensive records proving that Watson Hospitality Group's success was built on systems I developed independently. At exactly 2 p.m., 1 hour before Eloise's arbitrary deadline, I walked through the corporate offices with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how this conversation was going to end. Eloise's assistant, Melissa Adams, looked up nervously as I approached. "Ms. Davies, she's in a meeting with, she'll want to see me," I said calmly, walking past her desk toward the closed office door. "But she specifically said," I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Eloise was sitting behind her designer desk, talking on her phone with someone about optimizing labor costs across all departments. When she saw me, her expression shifted from surprise to irritation to that same smug satisfaction I'd seen 3 days earlier. "I'll call you back," she said into the phone, hanging up deliberately slowly to emphasize that I was interrupting something important. "Margot, you're early. I hope this means you've come to your senses about our generous offer." "Actually," I said, settling into the chair across from her with deliberate calm, "I've come to make you an offer." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me?" I placed my folder on her desk and opened it to the first document. "This is a licensing agreement for the continued use of my proprietary guest experience management systems. Specifically, the customer preference tracking system, the staff training methodologies, the partnership development framework, and the operational optimization protocols that have generated approximately $12.3 million in additional revenue for Watson Hospitality Group over the past 4 years. The color drained from her face as she stared at the document. "Your what?" "Those systems belong to Watson Hospitality Group. Your employment contract clearly states." "Actually, it doesn't," I interrupted, placing the second document on top of the first. "This is a legal analysis prepared by Rosalind Foster of Foster and Associates, specialists in hospitality industry intellectual property law. As you can see, my employment contract only covers innovations developed using company resources during standard business hours." I leaned back in my chair, watching her scan the legal brief with growing alarm. "The interesting thing about innovation, Eloise, is that it rarely happens during business hours. It happens at 2 a.m. when you're waiting in a therapist's office and suddenly realize how to solve a customer retention problem. It happens on weekends when you're researching industry best practices on your own computer. It happens when you're drawing on 20 years of personal experience to create something that has never existed before." Her hands were shaking slightly as she turned pages. "This is ridiculous. You can't just." "I can and I have," I said, my voice remaining perfectly calm. "Every major system that transformed Watson Hospitality Group from a struggling regional chain into an industry leader was prototyped in my home office, using my own equipment, based on methodologies I developed independently. I have dated documentation proving the development timeline, including video logs of prototype testing and receipts for software and resources I purchased personally." I placed the third document on her desk. "This is my comprehensive record of contributions to Watson Hospitality Group's operational success, including detailed financial analysis of revenue increases directly attributable to my innovations. $12.3 million over 4 years, as I mentioned. The licensing fee I'm proposing is $8,500 per month for continued use of these systems." Eloise's voice was barely a whisper. $8,500 per month? "Exactly what you were planning to cut from my annual salary," I confirmed. It seemed like poetic justice. She stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back against the window. "You can't do this. We'll fight you in court. We have resources you can't imagine." I smiled, feeling genuinely calm for the first time in days. "You could certainly try. But discovery would be fascinating. All those emails about systematically removing experienced employees to optimize labor costs. The consulting reports recommending replacement of senior staff with recent graduates. The documentation of constructive dismissal tactics designed to force resignations while avoiding severance obligations." Her face went white. "How do you know about, Eloise? I've been in hospitality management for 20 years. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a standard union-busting playbook when I saw one? Or that I wouldn't document everything once?" I realized what was happening. I placed the fourth document on her desk. "This is a signed offer letter from Southwestern Luxury Resorts for the position of Director of Guest Experience Innovation. Starting salary, $145,000 annually, plus performance bonuses, plus a research and development budget. They're very excited about adapting my methodologies to their properties. Her jaw actually dropped. You're going to our competitor? I'm going to a company that values expertise over pedigree, I corrected. But that brings us to your real problem. I leaned forward, maintaining direct eye contact. You see, Eloise, I've spent this week talking to department heads at all 5 Watson properties. Do you know what I discovered? Guest satisfaction scores have dropped 8 percentage points since you took over 3 months ago. Employee turnover has increased by 180%. 3 major partnership agreements are up for renewal next month, and the vendors have specifically asked whether I'll be continuing to manage those relationships. Her face was cycling through emotions: shock, panic, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. You have 2 options, I continued in the same calm tone. Option 1, you can license my systems at the rate I've specified, acknowledge that your attempted salary reduction was illegal, and restore my position with appropriate compensation. I might even consider staying to help train whoever you think can replace me. I stood up, straightening my blazer. Option 2, I accept Southwestern's offer, remove my proprietary systems from your operations, and take my institutional knowledge to a company that will compensate me appropriately. In which case, you'll get to explain to your father why Watson Hospitality Group's guest satisfaction scores are plummeting and why 3 of your most profitable partnerships just walked out the door. I reached into my folder and pulled out one final document. Oh, and there's a third option I should mention. This is a complaint I've prepared for the Arizona Department of Labor regarding systematic constructive dismissal of experienced employees. Lydia Perry, James Martin, and 4 other former employees have already provided statements about their experiences. We could file this complaint today, or, I left the sentence hanging as I gathered my documents. You have until 5 p.m. to decide, I said, walking toward the door. After that, my offer expires and I start my new position on Monday. I paused at the door and turned back to look at her. She was standing frozen behind her desk, staring at the licensing agreement like it was written in a foreign language. By the way, Eloise? Your father is going to want to see all of this. I've already requested a meeting with him for Monday morning. I thought he should understand exactly what's been happening to his company while he's been planning his succession strategy. I walked out of her office with my spine straight and my head high, feeling the weight of 4 years of undervaluation lift from my shoulders. Eloise Bailey had just learned the most expensive lesson of her privileged life. Expertise earned through decades of hard work will always be more powerful than authority inherited through family connections, and her education was just getting started. Walking out of Eloise Bailey's office felt like emerging from an underwater cave into bright sunlight. For the first time in 4 years, I felt the intoxicating sensation of holding all the cards in a professional negotiation. My hands weren't shaking. My voice hadn't wavered. I had looked privilege and entitlement directly in the eye and refused to blink. The corporate office buzzed with its usual Friday afternoon energy, but everything felt different now. Melissa Adams looked up from her desk as I passed, her expression curious and slightly worried. She'd undoubtedly heard raised voices from Eloise's office, and in a company where most conversations with the boss ended in tears or resignations, my calm exit was probably confusing. Have a great weekend, Melissa, I said with genuine warmth. She'd always been kind to me, and none of this was her fault. You too, Ms. Davies, she replied, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty that suggested she wasn't sure if I'd be back on Monday. I made it to my car in the parking garage before the adrenaline hit. Sitting behind the wheel, I felt my heart rate spike as the full magnitude of what had just happened began to register. I had just declared war on the CEO's daughter. I had demanded licensing fees that exceeded my current annual salary. I had threatened to expose systematic employee exploitation to state labor authorities. 3 days ago, I'd been a desperate single mother facing financial ruin. Now I was a hospitality industry professional with a competing job offer, documented proof of my value, and enough legal ammunition to protect myself from retaliation. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This is Rosalind Foster. How did it go? I called her back immediately. She looked like someone had just told her that her trust fund was being audited by the IRS, I said, and Rosalind's laughter echoed through my car speakers. Perfect. What was her response? Shocked silence, followed by threats about company resources and fighting in court. Then more shocked silence when I mentioned the Department of Labor complaint and the meeting with Arthur Watson. Excellent. Now we wait. But Margot, I want you to be prepared for retaliation. Eloise might try to make your remaining time there difficult, or she might attempt to restrict your access to company systems. Document everything, and call me immediately if anything feels illegal or retaliatory. Actually, I said, feeling another wave of calm confidence, I don't think I'll be there much longer either way. Southwestern Luxury Resorts wants me to start as soon as possible, and honestly, after today I'm not sure I want to work for a company that would put someone like Eloise in a leadership position. That's probably wise. But let's see how this plays out over the weekend. You might be surprised by how quickly attitudes change when family businesses realize their legal exposure. After we hung up, I sat in the parking garage for a few more minutes, processing the emotional whiplash of the past hour. 3 days ago, I'd felt powerless and trapped. Now I felt like I'd just reminded the entire hospitality industry why experience and expertise matter more than credentials and connections. I drove home with the windows down, letting the warm Phoenix afternoon air wash over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't calculating financial stress or worrying about worst-case scenarios. I was thinking about possibilities. Sophia was waiting for me when I walked through the apartment door, her homework spread across the dining table as usual. But instead of the quiet, focused concentration I'd grown accustomed to, she looked up with bright, curious eyes. "Mom, you look different again. But good different this time." I laughed, setting my purse down and collapsing onto our couch. "It's been quite a day, sweetheart. Did you remind them how big you actually are?" Her question caught me off guard. She remembered our conversation from earlier in the week, when she'd shared Dr. Green's advice about handling bullies. In all the strategic planning and legal preparation, I'd almost forgotten that this had started as a conversation about people who try to make you feel small. "I think I did," I said. "I definitely reminded them that expertise earned through hard work is more valuable than authority that's just handed to someone." Sophia closed her textbook and looked at me seriously. "Are we going to be okay? With money and school and everything?" I pulled her over to sit next to me on the couch. "More than okay. Remember how I told you that your school and therapy were non-negotiable? Well, it turns out that other people value the work I do much more than my current company does. I might be starting a new job soon that pays significantly more money." Her eyes widened. "Really? How much more?" "Enough that you won't ever have to worry about me doing math at the kitchen table late at night again. Enough that we could even think about moving to a bigger apartment if you wanted. With a real office for you? And maybe a yard for when we get that dog we talked about?" I felt my chest tighten with love and possibility. "Maybe. Would you like that?" "I'd love that. But mostly I just want you to not look worried all the time." It struck me then how much of my stress I'd been carrying into our home, despite my best efforts to shield her from adult concerns. Sophia was perceptive enough to read my emotional state even when I thought I was hiding it, and she'd been absorbing the anxiety of our financial uncertainty for months. "You know what?" I said, standing up and extending my hand to her. "Let's celebrate. What sounds good for dinner? And don't say pizza from the freezer. Let's go somewhere nice. Somewhere with actual waiters? Where they bring you menus." I laughed at her description of fine dining. Exactly that kind of place. We ended up at a family-owned Mexican restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale, sitting on their patio under string lights as the sun set behind the desert mountains. Sophia ordered enchiladas and spent dinner telling me about her environmental science project, her excitement about starting driver's education next year, and her thoughts about maybe studying hospitality management in college. "So I can understand what you do for work. You don't have to follow in my footsteps," I told her. "You can be anything you want to be." "I know. But you make things better for people when they're traveling and trying to relax. That seems like important work." As we shared flan for dessert, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Southwestern Luxury Resorts, with the subject line, "Welcome to the team." "Is that work?" Sophia asked, noticing my distraction. "Sort of. Remember how I said I might be getting a new job? Well, they just sent me some paperwork to make it official." "Can I see?" I showed her the email, which included not just welcome information but also details about their employee benefits package. Health insurance that would cover 100% of her therapy costs. Educational assistance programs. Even pet insurance, which made us both laugh. "This is a really good company," Sophia said, scrolling through the benefits summary. "They actually care about their employees' families." "Yes, they do. Very different from where I work now." My phone rang as we were walking back to the car. Arthur Watson's name appeared on the screen. "I should take this," I told Sophia, who nodded and started examining desert plants in the restaurant's landscaping while I answered. "Margot, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." Arthur's voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, uncertain, almost apologetic. "Not at all, Mr. Watson. What can I do for you?" "Well, that's actually what I should be asking you. Spent a very interesting hour with my daughter, and I think we need to have a conversation. Are you available to meet with me tomorrow morning? I know it's Saturday, but this seems rather urgent. My heart rate accelerated. Of course. What time works for you? How about 9 a.m. at my home office? I think this conversation would benefit from privacy, and I'd like to review some documents. Without the entire corporate office listening in. Arthur Watson's home was in the exclusive Silverleaf community in North Scottsdale, where Mediterranean-style mansions sat on multi-acre lots with views of the McDowell Mountains. I'd never been invited to his residence before. All of our previous interactions had taken place in corporate settings or at company events. Mr. Watson, before we meet, I want you to know that I have great respect for you and for what you've built with Watson Hospitality Group. What's happening isn't about you or your leadership. It's about ensuring that the people who've contributed to your company's success are treated fairly. There was a pause before he responded. Margot, I built this company on the principle that good work deserves recognition and fair compensation. If someone in my organization has lost sight of that principle, then we have a problem that needs immediate correction. After we hung up, I stood in the restaurant parking lot for a moment, watching Sophia examine succulents under the amber streetlights. 24 hours ago, I'd been facing financial ruin. Now I had a better job offer, legal representation, and a meeting with the CEO to discuss correcting the situation. Ready to go home? I asked Sophia. Ready? Was that your boss? Sort of. The big boss. We're going to have a conversation tomorrow about making sure everyone at his company is treated fairly. Good. Because you deserve to be treated fairly. Driving home through the desert night, with Sophia humming contentedly in the passenger seat and the lights of Phoenix spreading out below us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet confidence that comes from standing up for yourself and discovering that you're stronger than you knew. Eloise Bailey had tried to break me. Instead, she'd reminded me of my own power, and tomorrow, her father was going to find out exactly what his precious princess had been doing to the people who built his empire. The real resolution was just beginning. Saturday morning in Silverleaf felt like stepping into a different world. Arthur Watson's estate sprawled across 3 acres of meticulously maintained desert landscape, with indigenous plants arranged in patterns that highlighted the natural beauty of the Sonoran Desert rather than fighting against it. The main house was a stunning example of contemporary southwestern architecture, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the mountain views like living artwork. I'd dressed carefully for this meeting, professional but approachable, confident but respectful. This wasn't a battle like my confrontation with Eloise had been. This was potentially a conversation that could reshape everything, not just for me but for Watson Hospitality Group as a whole. Arthur answered the door himself, something that surprised me. In all my years at the company, he'd always been surrounded by assistants and executives. Seeing him in casual khakis and a polo shirt, without the armor of corporate formality, made him seem more human and somehow more formidable at the same time. Margot, thank you for coming on such short notice, he said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. Please, come in. Can I offer you coffee? I just made a fresh pot. His home office was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd built a successful hospitality empire, elegant but comfortable, with awards and photographs from 30 years in the business displayed alongside family pictures. What I hadn't expected was the conference table covered with documents that I immediately recognized as my personnel files, project reports, and financial analyses of Watson Hospitality Group's performance over the past 4 years. I spent most of yesterday evening and this morning reviewing your contributions to our company, Arthur said, gesturing for me to sit across from him. I'll be honest with you, I knew you were valuable, but I didn't fully understand the scope of what you've built for us until I started digging into the details. He opened a folder and pulled out a chart that tracked guest satisfaction scores across all 5 properties from 2020 to 2024. The transformation was dramatic, a steady climb from the 60 to 70% range to consistent ratings above 95%. This is remarkable work, he continued. But what's even more remarkable is that I apparently didn't know how much of our recent success was directly attributable to your innovations. That's a failure of leadership on my part. I felt a mix of validation and caution. Arthur Watson was known for his fairness and integrity, but he was also Eloise's father, and family loyalty could complicate even the most rational business decisions. Mr. Watson, I want to be clear that my concerns aren't about recognition or credit. They're about fair compensation and professional respect. What happened this week wasn't just an isolated incident, it was part of a pattern that's been building since Eloise took over operational oversight. His expression darkened. Tell me about that pattern. For the next hour, I walked him through everything I discovered about the systematic targeting of experienced employees. I showed him the documentation I'd gathered about Lydia Perry, James Martin, and 4 other professionals who'd been forced out through restructuring, impossible demands, or constructive dismissal tactics. They're all being replaced by recent college graduates at significantly lower salaries, I explained. The short-term cost savings are substantial, but the long-term operational impact is already becoming visible. I pulled out my laptop and showed him the guest satisfaction trends from the past 3 months. While still above industry averages, the scores were declining steadily across all properties. More concerning is the employee feedback, I continued, opening another file. Turnover in departments under Eloise's direct oversight has increased by 180%. Exit interviews consistently mention lack of appreciation for experience and feeling like institutional knowledge isn't valued. Arthur studied the data with the focused attention of someone who'd built his business by understanding operational details. After several minutes of silence, he looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Margot, I need to ask you something directly. Is my daughter targeting you specifically because she sees you as a threat to her authority, or is this part of a broader strategy that she believes will benefit the company? The question was fair, and I appreciated his directness. I think it's both. The consulting report she's following recommends replacing senior employees with junior staff to optimize labor costs. But the way she's implementing it suggests personal motivations as well. She's not just cutting expenses, she's systematically removing anyone with the experience to question her decisions or challenge her authority. I handed him a copy of the consulting firm's recommendations that Rosalind Foster had obtained through industry contacts. This is the playbook she's following. The problem is that it treats institutional knowledge and professional relationships as replaceable commodities rather than valuable assets. Arthur spent 20 minutes reviewing the consulting report, and I watched his expression shift from concern to anger to something that looked like profound disappointment. This is not how I built Watson Hospitality Group, he said finally. We succeeded because we invested in people, not because we treated them as interchangeable resources. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking his desert garden. Margot, I owe you an apology. I've been so focused on succession planning and transitioning responsibilities to the next generation that I failed to monitor how those responsibilities were being executed. That's inexcusable. Mr. Watson, I understand the challenges of family business succession. But the people who built your company's reputation deserve better than to be discarded for short-term cost savings. He turned back to face me. You're absolutely right. And I want to make this situation right, not just for you but for everyone who's been affected. What would that look like from your perspective? I'd been preparing for this question since Thursday. First, the employees who were forced out through constructive dismissal should be offered reinstatement with back pay and formal apologies. Second, the consulting firm's recommendations should be abandoned in favor of a strategy that values experience and institutional knowledge. Third, there needs to be accountability for what's happened. And for you specifically? Honestly? I've already accepted a position with Southwestern Luxury Resorts that offers significantly better compensation and growth opportunities. But I'd be willing to stay temporarily to help transition my systems and train my replacement, if you're committed to changing the culture that created this situation. Arthur nodded slowly. What would it take to convince you to stay permanently? I'd been hoping he wouldn't ask that question, because the answer was complicated. It would require fundamental changes in leadership and decision-making processes. It would require Eloise either learning to value expertise over cost-cutting, or being removed from operational oversight entirely. And it would require compensation that reflects my actual value to the organization. What kind of compensation? I pulled out the Southwestern Luxury Resorts offer letter. This is what the market believes my expertise is worth. $145,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses tied to guest satisfaction improvements across their portfolio, plus a research and development budget for innovation projects. Arthur studied the offer letter with the same careful attention he'd given to my operational reports. They're getting a bargain, he said finally. Based on what I've seen today, your contributions to our company have generated far more value than this compensation package reflects. My phone buzzed with a text message. Eloise, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the office this afternoon? I showed the message to Arthur, who frowned deeply. I think it's time for a family conversation, he said. Would you be willing to join me for a meeting with Eloise this afternoon? I'd like to address this situation directly, with all parties present. The prospect of facing both Eloise and her father simultaneously was intimidating, but it also represented an opportunity to resolve everything definitively. Of course. What time? How about 2 p.m. at the corporate office? I think Eloise needs to understand the full scope of what she's Done, and how we're going to fix it. After our meeting, I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic but emotionally drained. The conversation with Arthur had been productive, but it had also highlighted how much damage had been done to Watson Hospitality Group's culture and operations. Over the past few months, Sophia was waiting for me with lunch prepared, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food that felt perfect for the strange mix of emotions I was experiencing. "How did it go with the big boss?" she asked as we ate. "He's a good man who's been letting his daughter make bad decisions. I think he's going to fix the situation, but it's complicated because families and businesses don't always mix well." "Are you still going to take the new job?" I'd been wrestling with that question all morning. "I think so. Sometimes when trust is broken, it's hard to repair completely. Even if they fix everything and offer me more money, I'm not sure I'd feel secure working for a company where someone like Eloise could gain power again in the future." "That makes sense. Plus, you said the new company actually cares about employees' families. That seems important." At 1:30 p.m., I was back in my car, driving toward what I hoped would be the final chapter of my employment with Watson Hospitality Group. But I wasn't driving toward defeat or compromise. I was driving toward a resolution that would demonstrate the power of documentation, preparation, and refusing to accept less than your worth. Eloise Bailey was about to have the most important conversation of her professional life. And her father was going to make sure she understood exactly what had been at stake all along. The real transformation of Watson Hospitality Group was about to begin. Walking into Watson Hospitality Group's corporate offices that Saturday afternoon felt like entering the final scene of a movie where justice was about to be served. The building was mostly empty, with only security and a few weekend staff present, but the conference room on the executive floor was brightly lit. Through the glass walls, I could see Arthur Watson sitting at the head of the table with documents spread in front of him, and Eloise pacing near the windows with the agitated energy of someone who knew her world was about to change dramatically. Arthur stood when I entered, extending the same professional courtesy he'd shown at his home that morning. Eloise barely looked up from her phone, where she appeared to be furiously typing text messages. "Thank you both for being here," Arthur began, settling back into his chair with the authoritative presence I remembered from company meetings. "We have some serious issues to address, and I want to resolve them today." Eloise finally looked up, her expression a mixture of defiance and barely concealed panic. "Dad, I hope Margot has explained that her demands are completely unreasonable. She's trying to claim ownership of company systems and, Eloise." Arthur's voice carried a tone that made both of us sit up straighter. "I've spent the past 18 hours reviewing Margot's contributions to our company, the legal implications of your actions, and the operational damage that's been done over the past 3 months. I think you should listen rather than talk right now." He opened the folder in front of him and pulled out the guest satisfaction charts I'd shown him that morning. "Our satisfaction scores have dropped 8 percentage points since you took over operational oversight. Employee turnover has increased by 180%. We've lost 6 experienced professionals to restructuring in 2 months, and our most profitable partnerships are asking specifically whether Margot will continue managing those relationships." Eloise's face was cycling through emotions as her father continued his assessment of her performance. "More importantly," Arthur continued, "I've discovered that the consulting firm whose recommendations you've been following has a track record of leaving companies worse off than they started. Their optimization strategies prioritize short-term cost savings over long-term operational sustainability." He slid another document across the table. "This is a legal analysis of your attempt to cut Margot's salary by 80%. According to our attorney, it constitutes constructive dismissal, which is illegal under Arizona employment law. The company could face significant liability for that action alone." "But the consulting report said," Eloise began. "The consulting report was wrong," Arthur said flatly. "And your implementation of it has been catastrophic. You've systematically dismantled the expertise that made this company successful, and you've done it in ways that expose us to legal action." I watched this conversation unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. Eloise was clearly in over her head, but she was also Arthur's daughter, and family dynamics in business situations are always complicated. "Mr. Watson," I said, "I think it's important to acknowledge that Eloise was following advice from professionals she trusted. The problem isn't malicious intent, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates value in hospitality businesses." Arthur nodded appreciatively. "That's generous of you, Margot. But intention doesn't mitigate impact. The question now is how we move forward." He pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. "I've spent this morning making calls to the 6 employees who were forced out through restructuring. I've offered all of them reinstatement with back pay, formal apologies, and compensation for the professional disruption they experienced. 5 of them have accepted. I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that Lydia Perry and the others would be able to return to jobs they'd earned through years of dedicated service. Eloise, Arthur continued, you're going to personally apologize to each of those employees, and you're going to spend the next 6 months working directly with them to understand why experience and institutional knowledge matter more than cost optimization. Eloise's expression had shifted from defiance to something that looked like genuine remorse. Dad, I thought I was helping the company. The consulting firm showed us how much money we could save. Money we'll lose 10 times over when our guest satisfaction scores tank and our partnerships dissolve, Arthur replied. Success in hospitality isn't about minimizing labor costs, it's about maximizing guest experiences. That requires expertise, not just enthusiasm. He turned to me. Margot, I want to make you an offer that I hope will convince you to stay. Director of Guest Experience Innovation for all Watson properties, at $160,000 annually plus performance bonuses tied to satisfaction improvements across our portfolio. Full authority over operational systems, training programs, and partnership development. And reporting directly to me, not through Eloise. The offer was substantial, more than Southwestern Luxury Resorts had proposed, but I'd made my decision. During the drive over. Mr. Watson, I'm grateful for the offer, and I'm glad you're making things right for the other employees. But I've already committed to Southwestern, and honestly, I think that's the right choice for both of us. Some bridges, once burned, are difficult to rebuild completely. Arthur nodded with what looked like understanding and respect. I can't say I'm not disappointed, but I understand your position. What would you need from us to ensure a smooth transition? 2 weeks to document my systems and train whoever you choose to replace me. And I'd like to recommend Lydia Perry for the position. She understands my methodologies better than anyone and has the experience to maintain what we've built. Done, Arthur said immediately. And Margot? I want you to know that your contributions to this company won't be forgotten. You transformed our business, and you handled this situation with more professionalism than we deserved. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Southwestern Luxury Resorts, reviewing guest satisfaction reports that showed consistent 97% ratings across all properties where we'd implemented my enhanced experience management systems. My team had grown to include specialists in guest psychology, partnership development, and operational optimization, resources I'd never had at Watson. Sophia had started her junior year at Phoenix Preparatory Academy with renewed confidence, knowing that her education was secure and that our financial stress was permanently behind us. She'd also convinced me to adopt a rescue dog named Rosie, who spent her days sleeping under my desk while I worked, but the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. Lydia Perry called me on a Tuesday afternoon with news that made my day. Margot, you're never going to believe this. Watson Hospitality Group just won the Arizona Hotel and Lodging Association's award for Best Employee Retention Program. Arthur specifically credited the return of experienced staff and the abandonment of cost-cutting strategies for the improvement. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. How's Eloise doing? Actually, she's been surprisingly receptive to learning. She spent 2 weeks shadowing me to understand guest services operations, and she's been asking really thoughtful questions about balancing efficiency with quality. I think this experience taught her some important lessons about leadership. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen when people are forced to confront the consequences of their actions and choose to grow from those experiences. 6 months after that confrontation in Arthur Watson's conference room, I received an email that perfectly captured why I'd made the right choice. It was from the general manager of a boutique hotel in Sedona who'd attended a presentation I'd given at an industry conference. Your approach to guest experience management has revolutionized how we think about hospitality, he wrote. We've implemented your systems and seen a 40% increase in return bookings. More importantly, our staff satisfaction scores have never been higher. You've reminded us that success in this industry comes from valuing both guests and employees. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, I want you to remember a few key things. First, your worth isn't determined by people who benefit from undervaluing you. Second, documentation and preparation are your best weapons against workplace exploitation. Third, sometimes the scariest decision, standing up for yourself, demanding better, risking the known for the unknown, is actually the path to the life you've been trying to build all along. If my story has meant something to you, please hit that like button and subscribe. This community has been incredibly supportive, and sharing these experiences helps all of us recognize when we need to stand our ground. Drop a comment telling me about a time you had to fight for your worth. I read every single one, and your stories matter. And if you're currently in a situation like I was at Watson Hospitality Group, undervalued, exploited, told that you should be grateful for less than you deserve, know that your moment of revolution might look different than mine, but it's waiting for you to claim it. Sometimes the quietest revolutions truly are the most devastating. And sometimes the best revenge is building a life so successful that your former situation becomes just an interesting story you tell to inspire others. Your worth is non-negotiable. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.